this conversation today is Credible India Enterprising West, and that's probably because we're at a Western CII event. So, of course, the focus of the Western region is important. I'm from this region, and anyone who is extremely proud. But the fact is that Credible India, or I would say Incredible India, is the story of the moment. And this is not something that just we are saying. You'll pick up any report right now, and it's talking about India's decade. In fact, a Morgan Stanley report earlier this week talked about how this is India's decade for several reasons. It's a confluence of factors and right place, right time in a sense, whether it's geopolitical, whether it's demographic dividend, whether it's credible macroeconomic performances time and again. So we're going to talk about a couple of themes over here. We have a goal set for 2047 for a Viksit Bharat, a developed nation. And while that sounds great to everyone, you know, it's India's time and place. Couple of things. Do we have to wait for 2047? What does our version of Viksit look like? Because there is a very standard definition of what a developed nation is. Are we adhering to those norms, or do we have our own path to chart? And that's what I'm hoping to capture with some people on, and everyone, this excellent panel today. So let me kick off with that, and let me start with Dr. Praveer Sinha and his views on this subject. So when we talk about 2047, Viksit Bharat, and of course, a credible India with the role of the Western region, if you may like to add, I want to understand what is your take on what this Viksit Bharat looks like.
Thank you, Tamanna, and such a pleasure to be part of this discussion. I think let's try to break this. While we have the long-term plan for 2047, we also have short-term plan for 2027 and 2030 and 2040. And I think if you see how things are evolving, where we want to be 5 trillion by 2027, and by 2030 we should be 7 trillion, there is definitely a directional roadmap that has to be set. And the way things are today geared up in the country, and let me talk about the power sector, there is huge amount of interest. The type of investment that we are looking at between now and 2030 is nearly 5 lakh crores. And that's the type of investment that will happen. And this will happen in the energy transition space, where there is a lot of push and government has committed, Prime Minister himself has said that we'll have 500 gigawatt of clean energy on non-carbon energy by 2030. And people ask me that, is it feasible? And I tell them that it is definitely feasible. And why do I say this? Few data points. 2000, we were 100 gigawatt. 2010, we became 200 gigawatt. We doubled. But it is not that it was a one-time thing. 2020, we doubled it to 400, and today we are at something like 440. So it's definitely something that we have done, and notwithstanding the COVID 2 years that we had, we still added capacity. So I think adding 500 gigawatt of clean energy is definitely possible, considering that our clean energy portfolio today is just 170 gigawatt. So I think this is the best phase. India is poised to leapfrog because we don't have a baggage which many other countries have, Europe and US and all that. They created a lot of inherent capacity which they have to close and then start into the clean energy. For us, our demand is increasing now, and that's where we will be able to create de novo, a fresh new energy transition solutions. And I'm very confident that if in clean energy, the type of investment and the type of technology that is happening, and I'm not just talking about just solar and wind, but also talking about the nuclear, small modular reactors, nuclear reactors, so many other areas where plasma technology and some of the other technology interventions are happening. So I think that if globally any country which has so much of potential, which is there, India is the place, and there is no way that anyone can miss this opportunity and make things happen.
So, in a sense, we're not late to the party, we're arriving at the right time in terms of sustainable energy is concerned. But, just a quick follow-up to what you said, Dr. Sinha, before, of course, I move on. The challenge, or I would say the push and pull for India has always been, we are an energy-hungry nation. And we want the cheapest, fastest, and most reasonable energy, which is why, and we've seen that in the last few years, our coal imports have gone up. We will need to do that. There may not be a situation where you will never use thermal energy at all. In that sense, do you think that in the larger picture, there will be a longer wait to move to sustainability, or can we manage it with the goals of development we have?
I think energy in India, and we are to that extent very fortunate, especially in our energy transition, and that's why we talk of energy transition. We don't talk of a knee-jerk reaction that something will happen tomorrow or day after, but in next 10 to 15 years or 20 years, this transition will take place. Just to give you again a perspective, today we have nearly 70-75% of our energy which comes from thermal energy, whether it is coal or gas. Going forward, this will change. This will change to maybe about 15 to 20%. So that's the transition. We are not talking about that it will become absolute zero, but majority of it will come. And many a times the question comes is that your clean energy, solar or wind, is infirm power. And how do you make it firm? How do you make it 24/7? You can't have scenarios where factories run when the sun is there or when the wind is blowing. So you have transition technologies, whether it is battery storage, pump storage, and the nuclear reactor. So I think necessity is the mother of invention, and today the way the changes are happening, the way the technology is changing. I have seen in labs globally, people are working on plasma technologies, nanotechnology, and by the end of this decade, we will have very good 24/7. So I want to be 100% sure that we will not have only during the period you have sun or wind, but during the period you want energy, that you will have clean energy. And this is something which is a necessity also, considering the type of climate change, the type of sustainability issues. You mentioned about the report. There was also a report where it talked about we have amongst the top 83, top 100 cities in the world, 83 are India, which are the most polluted cities. So this is a reality which is staring on us. This is a reality that we had in last 10 years, 54 extreme weather conditions. We have short memories. So I think it is a necessity, it will happen, and we are at the right time. And fortunately in India, sun is there right through the year. So I always tell sun is the new oil for India.
That's Praveer Sinha, foremost voice on energy transition in India, and thank you. That's going to be a big part of the path that we want to chart, and very rightly put that 2047 right now is the phrase we're talking about. It's a target set, but we need to move there quickly and on the way. Mr. Sanjeev Puri, let me come to you on your vision of what a developed nation would look like, because the parameters that are globally accepted is also about per capita expenditure, per capita income. And as India grows and the world is watching with awe at how fast we're growing, the question about whether it's equitable growth for everyone is always a very key question.
Yeah, a very, very good point. It has to be, development has to be on the bedrock of inclusive and sustainable growth. And before I come to the piece on the point that you made on per capita, let me just take a moment to talk about sustainable growth. For sustainable growth, there is one facet of energy transition, decarbonization, and then, the world cooling down. But as much as we would like it to cool faster, the reality is that it's going to take a long time before it starts cooling, because the temperatures will increase, extreme weather events will increase, and you cannot talk of a developed world if the world continues to be devastated by floods, heat waves, and droughts, and challenges of agriculture, productivity, shortages of water. You're seeing it in Bangalore. Today morning I was seeing Johannesburg has the same issue. So forget per capita income. If those basic necessities are not met, what do we mean by a developed world? Forget a Viksit Bharat, okay? So I think the first and foremost issue that we need to build a very strong foundation is of sustainable growth is really the piece on nature and adaptation. We need to get our act together as far as adaptation and nature is concerned. We need to work out the methods of living comfortably in the hot new world, in the world that will have more extreme weather events. So I think that's a very important fundamental pillar. If it is not done, it's not going to lead to great quality of life. And we know that health also, is going to become an issue with global warming. And we have seen some of the consequences of the fashion of development that world has adopted. COVID is a consequence of that. Ultimately, it's a consequence of our developments. So I think that part needs to be fixed if we are really to talk about a developed nation or a developed world in 2047. The second is that it's important that, it's not about averages of per capita, it's about inclusivity. It's about inclusive growth. How well is every participant of the society benefiting from the progress that the nation makes? And that's the vision that Honorable Prime Minister also speaks about, sustainable and inclusive growth. And it's about women power, it's about incomes in agriculture, it's about gainful employment for people who want it. So it will be about us getting competitive in large manufacturing sectors which employ a lot of people. It's about also, playing to our demographic dividend by really accelerating skilling and education so that we have a competent workforce that can deliver for the world. And it's a plus for us because the whole world has a demographic challenge. So it's a big opportunity for us. It's about being able to develop sectors like tourism, which have huge economic multipliers, so that gainful employment is found. So it has to be on the bedrock of sustainable growth, strong foundation for adaptation, and inclusivity, where every member of the society can participate in the progress.
Another very important leg of where our growth story is going, I would say, and I'll come to Mr. R. Dinesh on this, is absolutely the supply chain, the logistics part of it. And we are at this sweet spot. You've had the freight corridors finally on now. You have connectivity like never before. You have a Gati Shakti scheme on, and where that confluence is happening. What is the kind of game changer this is going to be, sir?
Thank you, Tamanna. So if you look at it, I think let us step back for a minute. What does this infrastructure really mean for India? If you look at every time where India has had the opportunity of potentially being part of global supply chains, you would have run into this, I would call it, oft-repeated issue of saying, oh, India is not competitive enough. And the reason why that has been is because we didn't have the physical infrastructure available in, I would call it, enough scale. You had sporadic attempts being made at that. I think over the last 5-7 years, you actually see not just the physical infrastructure having been invested in, and obviously you know the amounts and the value which has been invested in, and I think that sets a very strong base for, I would call it, the ease of being part of global supply chains. But the real value is what India has done is how we have digitally managed this flow of information, which is what is the reason why I would call it companies are coming in to invest in India, and India has a great opportunity to be part of a global supply chain. So that digital infrastructure, I'll give you an example. Today, every movement of goods from point A to point B in India is actually mapped and visible real time. I can tell you no other country in the world has got that kind of a data available with a government agency to be able to track and actually add value. So if you look at the Gati Shakti program, while that is on the infrastructure investment side, if you look at the reverse side of it, I know that actually there are what they call hotspots in terms of wherever delays are taking place in terms of transportation, road transportation for example, or where there is a problem with regard to goods being stuck, is today visible at the Logistics Division Secretariat. So that kind of digital visibility is why I believe that India has, I would call it, genuinely graduated to being able to be part of this global supply chain. That's point A. Point B, which is equally important, is I would call it the strategic shift and the positioning of India as being a partner who can be trusted, and therefore people coming in and investing in and working with themselves or working with Indian companies to be part of this. The final point I'd like to make here is the challenge is how do we make sure that our Indian MSMEs, our I would call it tier 2, tier 3 suppliers actually start becoming integrated into that global supply chain, but that's for later.
Yeah. No, quick follow-up over there, because you talked about, in a sense, the China plus one factor. And if India is being positioned as the nation that can reach there, we need to be as competitive. In your view, where do we stand in terms of being competitive enough in connectivity, in those logistic supply chains, which will make your MSMEs also competitive when it comes to exports?
So that's a very good question again, but I don't think the right comparison is China. The right comparison are other Asian markets. And I would also not say that it is China plus one. In fact, I've officially stated it even before. I believe people come and invest here because they are interested in the domestic market and also are interested, I would call it, in strategically diversifying away from one country. It could be China, it could be any other country with whom they have invested with. So, because the China plus one is a limited window of opportunity. This is a much larger window of opportunity, at least 5-7 year window of opportunity. So you are right, we will need to be competitively benchmarking ourselves against other Asian countries. The cost of doing business, as I said, the ease of doing business is much better in many ways. But I think the real issue we'll have to work with is at the states level, is at, I would call it, the ability for each of these states to become integrated, like in the Gati Shakti program, to actually be there visible, and the investments and capex which is now taking place be actually tracked to see the best value. The last comment I will make, I think you asked earlier about what is going to be India's differentiator. My view is India has got to invest in all of these infrastructure, whether it be physical or phygital or digital, to really make a utilization of this far higher. I'll give you an example from the transport sector. Suppose we say a truck is being utilized 80%, it's 20% waste. You may say global benchmark is whatever, 68% or 72%, but I believe India can set the standard because of this digital physical coming together to say that our utilization is going to be best in class across, which will then significantly reduce your cost. So rather than work on what I would call the supply side, I think we will need to work on the utilization side.
And transportation becomes important not just for goods and services, but for people as well. So, you know, that's my segue to speak to Vinay Dubey. And Vinay, I'm glad to speak to you today because you run, I think, one of India's youngest airlines, also fastest growing. And I think it's right time, right place for you guys as well, right? Your airline trajectory is matching along with the speed with which Indians are taking to the skies. The growth in passenger numbers. Yes, you know, the COVID period had that setback, but post then, the pickup that we have seen has coincided with Akasa's path as well. And has that been a happy coincidence for you?
Thank you for that, Tamanna. Yeah, happy coincidence certainly, but when you start an airline, you don't start it coincidentally, especially when you start an airline in the midst of COVID. So I would say this is an anticipated event. You know, you're sitting in the middle of COVID, and you can feel palpatably that this is a temporary phenomena. As a human race, you could feel we're going to get over it, and as Indians, you feel you're going to get over it, which is why it felt like the best possible time to actually start an airline. And this growth is not for 1 or 2 years. You know, we're talking about 2047. We've got maybe 500 flying aircraft today. In 2047, we could have 3,500 flying aircraft with a woman CEO of Akasa. We also talk about energy. Just to give you a sense, we don't have statistics on the world's greenest airline. We don't. At least I'm not familiar with it. So I'm going to make a very provocative statement here that I believe India as a country, but Akasa also specifically has some of the world's greenest airlines. So in India, you've got some of the largest fleet of modern aircraft. Whether you look at the 320 Neo, whether you look at the Boeing 737 MAX, whether you look at the 350s, we've got the largest percentage of modern fuel-efficient aircraft in India. And at Akasa, it's 100% of our fleet are modern fuel-efficient aircraft. On top of that, we've got flight attendant uniforms that are made out of recycled marine waste. The soles of our shoes are made out of recycled rubber, the packaging, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'd say when it comes to airlines, we should take great pride in India from an energy perspective because we're running the youngest, most modern fleet here.
Having said that, Vinay, I mean, every activist who's pushing for sustainability worth their salt will say flying is the worst thing that you can do for the environment. So till you fly on ATF, can the airline industry truly be sustainable? And what is the future? Is there an alternative in sight, is what I'm wondering.
Sure. I mean, there's sustainable aviation fuel. We don't have it across the world at a point that is either abundant or affordable. But that's coming. That's absolutely coming. But let us also look at the flip side. Again, we're talking about industry progress. There's a piece of our growth that is highly linked to growth in GDP, urbanization, growth in GDP per capita that is reflective of our economy. But I can promise you, without strong transportation links, whether it's airplane, whether it's rail, whether it's road, train, without transportation links, we can't maintain this. So, you know, infrastructure implies transportation infrastructure as well, and that's what we need for growth. So we have to find a balance between the two. I just wanted to take a minute to say that there may be places where we might be behind other countries, but when it comes to sustainability in aviation, I just want all of us to be proud of what India has today.
Yeah, certainly. And I think the Indian aviation industry is one of eternal optimism. People keep starting airlines. Those who have not managed to come back to try it again. So that actually, I think, in a sense, shows faith in the Indian passenger, that the moment there's an opportunity, she will fly. So I think that's interesting as well, definitely part of the bigger story. But I don't think we can talk about a Viksit Bharat without the idea of inclusion. And let me come to you, Ms. Salgaonkar, for your views on this. How does that tie in, and how do we ensure that diversity and inclusion is not just something you put in your marketing material, and you actually do it in the boardroom?
Thank you, Tamanna. I think as the only woman on the panel, it's appropriate that I was asked the diversity question. But I do think it's something that we have to look at holistically. It can't just be to tick the boxes, just because the government has mandated one woman director on a board, or just because you're trying to look good to external investors or your other stakeholders. But I think there really has to be a holistic way of thinking about diversity in each of our organizations. And I think CII, as an industry body, and each of our members, the onus really is on us to look at it not just in terms of leadership, not just in terms of at the shop floor, but look at the gender balances in each of our companies. And I think it has to go beyond just women. How do we look at the whole LGBTQIA community? How do we look at those who are differently abled, physically, mentally? How do we look at inclusiveness? It can't just be employees from tier 1 institutions from urban India. But really, how do we look at Viksit Bharat from with the lens of a true sense of inclusion across the country?
Thank you.